Learn how to responsify a newsletter or an email built with the Coffee Cup Email Designer. The email designer makes it pretty simple to make style and layout changes for different screen widths and viewports. So in Email Designer, once you've got your message pretty much locked down, you can use the slider and see what it's going to look like at different viewports. You know, in the example here, while it looked really good at larger screens, once I used my slider, everything kind of starts smushing together. Text is way too large. And basically the design no longer looks its best for smaller screens. Now, with Email Designer, some common items that are modified for smaller screens, would be things like font size, margin and padding, the spacing around elements, button size, even when it comes to stacking elements so that they take up more of the screen space and are easier and clearer to read on smaller devices. Now on the layout pane in Email Designer, you would set under the grid management area the overall width of your email, as well as set where you want the first default breakpoint. Now in the Coffee Cup emails, we generally have the email width set at about 720 pixels. It's a pretty standard size. And we go ahead and set our first breakpoint. Layout change would be at 720 as well. That first breakpoint in the project, the default one, is indicated by a red breakpoint up at the top. If you click on the breakpoint at any point, you can see the pixels up on the side. Now, layout changes would always be made once you're past that breakpoint when the slider is positioned to the left of it. To the right of it would be the default. So anything that you set style-wise would carry over all the way down to the smallest screen unless the alteration was made past the breakpoint at the top. Now let's use our slider and let's try to review some items that we'd want to change. First of all, that the gauges up in the top will kind of give you an indicator of what type of screen would be viewing the message. Now that welcome message header is awfully large. So I'm going to click at the top of the bar to add a breakpoint and then maybe decrease that size a bit for that particular screen. So over on the design pane, I'm going to lower it down, let's just say to 52 pixels. This way people who are using, that type of screen don't get screamed at with such a large text type. And if I keep going down, while that 52 looked good for tablets, for cell phones, it still becomes mighty large. So clicking again right up on the breakpoint bar adds another breakpoint to the canvas, and I can lower that font size. This way, for mobile users, it fits much better on the screen, while for desktop, as you can see, that welcome message is nice and large. It makes the best use of the space possible for each user. Now moving on, I'm going to do something similar with this design change for paragraphs. It's set as a default for 16 pixels, but as I scroll down, I think it might be nice to just increase that font size to 17 just to make it a little easier for people with smaller devices. Moving it past that last breakpoint again, I'm going to do the same thing with one more increase for that welcome message to 18 pixels. Now again, any style change you would want to make for that particular screen size would be to the left of that top breakpoint. Moving on, I'm going to make the same type of typography change to these subheadings, as they do become mighty large for the tablet viewers. Just a small decrease in a couple pixel size can really benefit for the smaller devices, especially when it comes to mobile users. We don't want to yell at them. It just looks a little nicer when it's appropriately sized. With those subheadings done, I'm also going to make another change to the paragraphs. This time I'm going to change on the design pane the apply styles to the type, meaning the default. So any paragraph element automatically would take on the style changes I'm applying for this particular screen width. The next thing I'm going to review is this subsection where there's two elements basically next to each other, the picture element and that paragraph with the button. As you can see, when it's at a smaller viewport, everything becomes a bit squished. Now, before I show you how I'm going to make the change, I'm going to teach you a little bit about the basics of the row and column structure in Email Designer. Now, under the layout section, you have the option to select your row, and each row can be divided up into columns of 12 spans across. Each column becomes a drop point for different content in your email. So if you wanted to have 12 pictures across, or you would do a span of 12. Or if you wanted to have a picture on one side and text on the other, you would do two columns that spanned 6 each. For example, I'm going to add in a full width with 2 columns. Each one spans 6 across. That's 6 and 6 would equal a total of 12. So see, I could pop in my heading and I could pop in that so that they sit in line. Again, each column makes up 6 spans for a total of 12. Now, when it comes to responsifying, you can always merge your columns. If you have a layout change, you can divide them using the divide column button under column management to break it up, and basically you can make yourself a nice little grid. As you can see though with the slider, once you get low, some of those columns do become pretty squished. But once you're past a breakpoint, you can always go in and change the width of each column. So you can make them stack by changing their width to 12 spans each, which would make them stack on top of each other. And really, you can do this as much as you want. You don't always have to go to 12. You could make one side 6 and one side 2. You could do 10 and 1. Really, anything that you want that fits your layout with a maximum of 12 spans across. I'm just going to show you real quick. I'm going to change one span. I'm going to change this row of 6 columns, and I'm going to set each one with a span of 6 when it's at the break point, and you can see how the content begins to stack. So now at the wide screens, I've got one row of 3 spans, each one taking up 3 spans, but at the smaller breakpoint, I've got 3 rows with each one taking up 6. Now back to my email example. In this row, I've got 2 columns. Each column is 6 spans across. So I'm going to use my slider and I'm going to take a look at how it appears at smaller screens. So as I slide down, in general it looks good until we start getting to the large phone tablet area. And here is where I think the content would look better stacked in the design. So I'm going to select the first column, and under the Layout tab, I'm going to change that span width to 12. It will bring that content into full screen. And then I'm going to do the same for the second column. Again, I'm going to change the width, the span width, to 12. And now the content nicely stacks on top of each other. Again, the spans don't have to be 12, but when you get down to those smaller screens, you want to make best use of the space, and 12 just makes sure that it's doing just that. You can see how it adapts when the screen size is changed. Going back up to the top of the email, I have another row of 2 columns. One with the social box and the logo. It all looks good until definitely the mobile. That's when things start getting really cramped. So I'm going to do the same thing by making each column the span width of 12. You can hover over any item if necessary to be able to select the column, or even use that inspector pane to select the appropriate column. Each one is going to be a span of 12. And since these have specific styles set to make them left and right aligned, I'm going to change their alignment so that they're nice and centered in the middle of the design. And these style changes and the layout will only appear for those screen widths. See, as I move my slider, they pop back to their appropriate location in the original design. And anything can really be tweaked at these breakpoints. I mean, you could change the button sizes if you wanted to make them a little bigger or smaller, to make it easier for people to click on at the screens. One other commonly edited thing would be the spacing, like the margins and padding. In this example, the column has left and right padding of 20 pixels for the left and right. This way the text isn't right up against the side of the email. But for smaller screens, it's quite a lot of extra white space. So changing that side spacing to about 10 pixels left and right, make sure that it's not just pushed right up against it. And I'm going to do the same for my mobile users. There you go. Pretty easy peasy to make these changes. These can all be adjusted, and if you ever need to reset a style, you can also do that from the design pane using the reset control. You can always add and remove breakpoints using that plus and minus arrow up at the top. If you have a change of heart, you can always use that plus and minus arrow to remove and add breakpoints. Thanks for joining me today. Go create some beautiful emails.